In the intricate and shadowy world of international espionage, some whispers are louder than war drums. In 2015, one such whisper turned into a deafening roar within the highest echelons of India's security apparatus. A chilling intelligence report landed on the desks of the top officials at the Research and Analysis Wing, or R&AW, India's formidable foreign intelligence agency. The report detailed a plot so audacious, so potentially catastrophic, that it threatened to plunge the entire Indian subcontinent into chaos. The target was not a military installation or a government building. The target was a man, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India. And the location for this planned assassination was not on Indian soil. It was to take place during his upcoming state visit to Dhaka, the capital of neighboring Bangladesh. An attack on a world leader is always a nightmare scenario. But an attack on the Prime Minister of India in a friendly foreign nation would be an act of war, an unforgivable breach that could trigger a conflict between nuclear-armed powers. The initial intelligence pointed towards a familiar adversary, a consortium of extremist groups with deep ties to Pakistan's notorious inter-services intelligence, the ISI. For decades, the ISI and R&AW had been locked in a silent, brutal war fought in the back alleys of Kabul, the jungles of Kashmir, and the bustling streets of cities across South Asia. A plot to destabilize India by targeting its leader was textbook ISI doctrine. But as R&AW's analysts dug deeper, sifting through encrypted communications and reports from human assets on the ground, a more shocking and disturbing picture began to emerge. The Pakistani-backed terror modules were not acting alone. According to the intelligence, they were receiving tactical support, funding, and logistical assistance from a far more powerful and entirely unexpected third party. The trail, improbably, led back to a handful of operatives allegedly linked to the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States. The implication was unthinkable, that elements within America's own spy agency were covertly aiding a plot that could lead to the assassination of the leader of the world's largest democracy. To understand why a city like Dhaka could become the stage for such a high-stakes geopolitical drama, one must understand the complex tapestry of alliances and enmities that defines the region. Bangladesh, born from the bloody liberation war of 1971 with India's direct military support, has always been a hornet's nest of geopolitical rivalries. On one side, you have the government of Sheikh Hasina, who maintains a strong, secular, and pro-India stance, seeing New Delhi as a vital partner for economic growth and regional stability. On the other, you have a powerful opposition with historical and ideological ties to Pakistan that seeks to pull Bangladesh away from India's orbit and closer to Islamabad and its allies. This internal political friction makes Bangladesh a fertile ground for foreign intelligence agencies to operate, to cultivate assets, and to wage proxy wars. For the ISI, it represents a critical eastern flank from which to foment instability in India's sensitive northeastern states. For R&AW, ensuring a friendly and stable government in Dhaka is a cornerstone of India's national security. Into this already volatile mix enters the larger global chessboard. The 21st century is defined by a new great game for influence in Asia. China, with its multi-trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative, seeks to encircle India by funding massive infrastructure projects in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, pulling them into a web of economic dependency. The United States, seeking to counter China's rise, has its pivot to Asia, a strategy that relies heavily on a strong strategic partnership with India. In this context, India is America's indispensable ally, a democratic counterweight to authoritarian China. So why, then, would any element of the CIA be involved in a plot that would spectacularly backfire on American strategic interests? The answer, according to intelligence analysts, lies in the murky doctrine of plausible deniability and the competing factions within the sprawling U.S. intelligence community. One theory suggests that certain old guard elements within the CIA, wary of India's independent foreign policy and its growing power, sought to create a crisis that would destabilize the region and give Washington more leverage. By using the ISI as a cutout, they could achieve their objective with no direct fingerprints, creating chaos they could then offer to manage. The game was afoot, and the stakes were nothing less than the stability of an entire subcontinent. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, R&AW was faced with a dilemma of monumental proportions. The evidence, though compelling, was circumstantial. It was a mosaic of intercepted chatter, reports from assets whose reliability was constantly in question, and expert analysis that connected the dots. It was enough to trigger alarm bells, but not enough to publicly accuse a strategic partner like the United States of complicity in an assassination plot. A direct confrontation with the CIA based on this intelligence would be a diplomatic catastrophe. It could shatter the fragile trust between the two nations, jeopardize intelligence sharing on counterterrorism, and potentially push India into a corner. Accusing the American deep state of such a heinous plot without irrefutable proof would make India look paranoid and reckless on the world stage. The leadership at R&AW knew they couldn't go to the Americans. They couldn't go to the public. They had to handle this themselves. The decision was made to launch a highly covert counter-operation. The goal was not just to neutralize the threat to the Prime Minister, but to do so in a way that would send a clear, undeniable message to everyone involved, the ISI, their extremist proxies, and their shadowy benefactors in the West. The operation had to be a masterpiece of surgical precision, a ghost operation that would expose the plot without ever officially acknowledging it happened. The first step was to discreetly inform their trusted counterparts in Bangladesh's own intelligence agency, the Directorate General of Forces Intelligence, or DGFI. This was a delicate dance. R&AW had to share just enough information to convey the gravity of the threat without revealing the full, explosive scope of their suspicions about CIA involvement. They framed the intelligence as a high-level ISI-backed plot, a threat that was as dangerous to Bangladesh's sovereignty as it was to the Indian Prime Minister. The DGFI, under the pro-India government of Sheikh Hasina, understood the stakes immediately. An attack on Modi in Dhaka would be a global humiliation for Bangladesh and could embolden the very extremist elements that threatened their own government. With the DGFI on board, a joint task force was secretly formed. The Indian and Bangladeshi teams began to pool their resources, mapping out the terror cells operating in and around Dhaka. The clock was ticking. Prime Minister Modi's visit was just weeks away. The core of the R&AW operation centered on turning the hunters into the hunted. Instead of just disrupting the plot, they decided to let it develop, to patiently watch the enemy build their own gallows. R&AW activated a network of its most seasoned assets within extremist circles in Bangladesh. Moles they had cultivated over years, individuals who were now in a position to report on the plot from the inside. These assets confirmed the initial intelligence. A team of assassins had been assembled, weapons were being procured, and a plan was being finalized. The attackers were planning to use a car bomb to target the Prime Minister's motorcade as it traveled from the airport to his hotel. It was a classic, brutal, and effective method. But the intelligence also came with another, more valuable piece of information: the location of the safe houses where the plotters were meeting and storing their explosives. R&AW now had a clear picture of the enemy's command and control structure. They knew who the foot soldiers were, who the local handlers were, and crucially, they were beginning to identify the foreign advisors who were providing technical expertise. This is where the operation took a sharp, aggressive turn. R&AW, in coordination with the DGFI, decided not to simply raid the safe houses. A premature raid would scatter the plotters, and the masterminds would escape. Instead, they initiated an intense campaign of psychological warfare. They began to burn the enemy's assets one by one. A low-level courier carrying instructions would be quietly arrested by Bangladeshi police on an unrelated, minor charge like drug possession, and his encrypted phone would be seized. A key financial middleman would find his bank accounts suddenly frozen due to a regulatory review. The plotters started to feel an unseen pressure. Their communications became unreliable. Their people started disappearing off the grid. Panic began to set in. They knew they were being watched, but they didn't know how or by whom. The ISI handlers, feeling the heat, became increasingly paranoid, suspecting a leak within their own ranks. The carefully constructed plot was beginning to unravel from the inside out, not because of a direct assault, but because of 1,000 tiny surgical cuts. The true genius of the R&AW strategy was how they handled the suspected American involvement. They knew they couldn't directly target anyone with a diplomatic passport, but they could make their presence utterly untenable. As the joint R&AW DGFI teams tightened the noose around the terror module, they made sure to leak specific, targeted pieces of information to friendly media outlets in Dhaka. A story would appear in a local newspaper about a police raid on a criminal gang that just happened to be next door to a safe house used by the plotters. Another report would detail the arrest of a foreign national for visa irregularities, a person who had been seen meeting with a known ISI frontman. These stories were signals. They were carefully crafted messages sent into the ether, meant for a very specific audience. For the American operatives on the ground, the message was clear. We see you. We know what you are doing. Get out now. It was a move of incredible audacity, using the press to communicate a threat from one spy agency to another, all without a single official word being spoken. The pressure was immense. Continuing to assist a plot that was so clearly compromised would be an act of complete recklessness. The shadow players were being forced to fold their hand. With the plotters in disarray and their handlers in a state of paranoia, the final phase of the operation began. The joint Indian-Bangladeshi task force had identified the primary safe house where the explosives for the car bomb were being stored. It was a nondescript apartment in a densely populated area of Dhaka. A direct, explosive raid was still too risky. It could lead to civilian casualties and would publicly expose the operation. A different approach was needed, one that was both silent and final. In the dead of night, a small, elite team from Bangladesh's Rapid Action Battalion, acting on precise intelligence from R&AW, surrounded the building. They didn't storm the entrance. Instead, they used sophisticated listening devices to confirm the number of individuals inside and to ensure they were all asleep. Then, using a specialized nerve agent delivered through the ventilation system, the entire cell was neutralized without a single shot being fired. By sunrise, the assassins, the bomb makers, and their local guides were all in custody, their grand plot dissolving into a quiet, anticlimactic capture. The physical threat was over. The aftermath was a masterclass in calculated silence. There was no triumphant press conference. No government official in India or Bangladesh ever publicly mentioned an assassination plot. The arrested individuals were processed through the Bangladeshi legal system under a laundry list of charges: illegal arms possession, conspiracy, terrorism, but the name of the ultimate target, Narendra Modi, was never entered into the official record. The entire incident was deliberately buried under layers of bureaucratic jargon and sealed case files. To the outside world, it was just another successful counter-terror raid in a region plagued by extremism. But within the global intelligence community, the message was delivered with the force of a sledgehammer. The ISI had been dealt a humiliating blow, their most ambitious plan in years dismantled before it even began. Their network in Bangladesh was shattered, with dozens of their assets either arrested or forced to flee. The real checkmate, however, was delivered to the suspected American elements. The two alleged CIA-linked operatives who had been advising the terror module abruptly left Dhaka just 48 hours before the final raid. Their departure was quiet, listed officially as a routine diplomatic rotation. But R&AW knew the truth. They had been pulled out by their superiors in Langley, who understood that their agents were compromised and that the Indians knew everything. By allowing them to leave peacefully, R&AW achieved its ultimate objective. It had exposed the plot, neutralized the threat, and forced the CIA's hand, all without firing a shot or causing a diplomatic incident. It was a demonstration of power and sophistication. The message was clear: India is not a playground for your proxy wars. We have the capability to see your hidden hand, and we will cut it off. The silence from Washington was deafening. No official complaint was lodged. No denial was issued. The game was over and they had lost. When Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in Dhaka, his visit was a picture of calm and cordiality. He signed historic agreements, addressed cheering crowds, and spoke of a new golden age in India-Bangladesh relations. The security was heavy, but no heavier than what is typical for a head of state. There was no visible sign of the drama that had just unfolded in the shadows. The Prime Minister himself was likely only briefed on the full, terrifying details after he was safely back on Indian soil. He had walked into a lion's den, completely unaware that his own intelligence agency had already declawed the lions. This incident fundamentally reshaped the rules of engagement between R&AW and its Western counterparts. It proved that India was no longer just a passive recipient of intelligence from the West, but a major power with its own formidable capabilities. It forced a new level of respect and caution from agencies that had long underestimated India's reach and resolve. The story of the 2015 Dhaka plot remains one of the most closely guarded secrets in modern espionage, a silent chapter in the long and bloody history of the Great Game. It is a testament to the unsung heroes of R&AW who operate in the gray world between war and peace. It is a story not of bombs and bullets, but of intellect, patience, and psychological warfare. It demonstrates how, in the 21st century, a spy agency can expose a superpower, dismantle a conspiracy, and protect its nation without ever leaving a fingerprint. The plot was real, the threat was existential, and the victory was absolute. But like all great intelligence triumphs, its proof lies not in the headlines it generated, but in the catastrophic disaster that was quietly and masterfully averted.